Hello there, thanks for stopping by Max's Cards and Dice Dugout for episode 124. And this time out, we are at Michigan International Speedway in Brooklyn, Michigan, or at Brooklyn, Michigan, for race number 19 of the 1991 stock car replay using Downey Games Fast Action Racing. This is race number 19, as I mentioned, at Michigan International Speedway. That race was known as the Champion Spark Plugs 400. It's the second race this season to carry that sponsor. We'll take a quick look at the track at Michigan. It's a 2-mile D-shaped oval where there is a +1 contact modifier and a -1 mechanical modifier. We'll get to that when those parts of the race come up. And on this race in 1991, August 18th of 1991, Alan Kowicki was the pole sitter and Dale Jarrett was the winner that day. So before we set the field for this race, let's take a look at the standings after race number 18 at Watkins Glen. As you can see, it's Bobby Hamilton now in the lead again. 8 points over Davey Allison, and they have made a little bit of a gap between them two and the rest of the top 10. And speaking of the rest of the top 10, in third place is Rusty Wallace. And going down the line, Alan Kowicki, Harry Gant, Sterling Marlin, Bill Elliott, Michael Waltrip, Ricky Rudd, and Chad Little. Real life 1991 Cup winner, or Cup champion, I should say, Dale Earnhardt remains in 11th place, just as he did going into race number 18. So we'll set the field for this race by placing the driver cards out, which I'm going to give a shuffle now. And as I always mention, this is not a representation, or should I say this grid is not a representation of position on the track, but rather a abstracted representation of various actions that occur during the race and the drivers that are involved in those different situations. So I've cut the deck and I've given it a cut, and we'll set the grid. And we got Ricky Rudd, Rusty Wallace, Davey Allison, Dale Earnhardt, Alan Kowicki, Ernie Irvin, Mickey Gibbs, Stanley Smith, Jeff Bodine, Lake Speed, Jimmy Spencer, Bill Elliott, Ted Musgrave, Brett Bodine, Rick Mast, Chad Little, Bobby Hillen Jr., Harry Gant, Jimmy Means, Dave Marcus, Ken Schrader, Mark Martin, Kyle Petty, Larry Pearson, Morgan Shepard, Sterling Marlin, Derek Cope, Rick Wilson, Richard Petty, Joe Rootman, Dale Jarrett, points leader and rookie Bobby Hamilton, Michael Waltrip, Darrell Waltrip, Terry Labonte, and Hut Strickland, who was the winner of the Watkins Glen race number 18. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is to determine who our pole sitter is. We're going to roll the red and white die, reading the white die first, and we got a 56. So we'll look for 56. And that's going to be Kyle Petty. Kyle Petty, who started off the season quite strong, but as of late has had some bad luck and some bad finishes, and has placed him in the middle of the pack. So Kyle Petty is the pole sitter for the Champion Spark Plug 400, and he's going to face a challenge right off the bat. And that challenge is coming from 11, Ricky Rudd. Okay, so for this first challenge only, the pulse hitter gets a +1. So that makes Kyle Petty a 12, Ricky Rudd's an 11. He's challenging at a -1. He needs an 8 to 12 to take the lead. He rolls that 8, and Kyle Petty's unable to fight him off. That's a pass. And Ricky Rudd is the race leader here early on. Okay, the first phase is a mechanical check. So we're going to select a random driver and 4 adjacents, and we're going to be looking at the red mechanical rating. And that is going to be 46. Which will be Bill Elliott. Doing a lot of bookkeeping off screen, so you have to excuse me. His 12 o'clock is Rick Wilson. We wrap around for that. His 3 o'clock is Michael Waltrip. His 6 o'clock, Joe Rootman. And his 9 o'clock is Derek Cope. Okay, so here at Michigan, mechanical gets a -1. So we're going to remove 1 from the red mechanical rating for these drivers. And they need to roll less. So there's a slightly increased chance of a mechanical failure here at Michigan than the average track on the circuit. It's the best way I could describe it. So Bill Elliott's a 9. He becomes an 8. He needs a 7 or less. He rolls a 5 and passes. Next is Rick Wilson. He's a 7. Remember, we're looking at the red mechanical avoidance rating. He becomes a 6. He needs a 5 or less. He rolls a 7 and is forced to retire because it's greater than his mechanical rating. So Wilson fails and DNFs. Next is Michael Waltrip. He's a 7. That makes him a 6. He needs a 5 or less. He rolls a 7. He's also forced to retire. There's a fail and a DNF. Next is Joe Rootman. Rootman has an 11. That makes him a 10. He needs a 9 or less. He rolls a 6 and passes. And the last check will be Derek Cope. He's a 3. That makes him a 2. So the only thing he can do with Snake Eyes is avoid having to retire, and he can stay out on the track. But unfortunately for Derek Cope, he rolls a 6, and he is also forced to retire. So that's a failure and a DNF. And after all that, because he wasn't involved in these mechanical checks, Ricky Rudd remains the race leader. And as we head into phase 2, he's going to face a challenge, and that's coming from Bill Elliott. All right, Elliott's an 11, Rudd's an 11. So Elliott is challenging at a 0. He needs a 7 to 12. He rolls a 5 and fails. Remains on the lead lap, but Ricky Rudd remains the race leader. Okay, so we go to phase 2, which is a phase of green flag racing. Going to select a random driver and the 4 adjacent. Excuse me, and they'll go up against leader Ricky Rudd using the green race rating and the quality pass matrix. Okay, so the challenge is coming from 43, King Richard Petty. Okay, his 12 o'clock is Jimmy Spencer. His 3 o'clock is Brett Bodine. His 6 o'clock, Lake Speed. And his 9 o'clock is Stanley Smith. Okay, so we're looking at the green race rating. First is Richard Petty. He's an 8, Rudd's an 11. Petty's challenging at a -3. He needs a 10 to 12. And he rolls that 10. And we have a new leader in Richard Petty. So that's a pass. And Richard Petty is the race leader. Okay, so now it's Jimmy Spencer, who's an 8. Richard Petty's an 8. So Spencer's challenging at a 0. He needs a 7 to 12. He rolls a 4 and fails. Remains on the lead lap, and Richard Petty remains the race leader. Next is Brett Bodine. He's a 9. Petty's an 8. He's challenging at a +1. He needs a 6 to 12. He rolls a 9, and we have a new race leader in Brett Bodine. Remember, this is green flag racing. So Bodine passes, and he's the race leader. Next is Lake Speed. He's a 6. Bodine's a 9. This challenge is at a -3. Speed needs a 10 to 12. He rolls an 8 and fails. And Brett Bodine remains the race leader. And the last check is Stanley Smith. He's a 2 going up against Bodine's 9. That makes him a -7. That's an automatic failure. So Stanley Smith, once again, unfortunately for him, was not trying to take the lead. He was trying to stay on the lead lap and was unsuccessful. So Bodine passes him, and he goes a lap down and gets a green lap marker. Green lap markers are cumulative in this game. All right, so after the green flag racing, we have a leader of Brett Bodine. Now we're going to conduct phase 3, which is a series of green flag pit stops and then a penalty check in the second part. So we do a random driver for adjacent. They go up against the leader, but this time we're going to be looking at the blue pit crew rating and using the quality pass matrix. So first, the challenge is coming from 66 Harry Gant. It is 12 o'clock is Darrell Waltrip. It's 3 o'clock. We wrap around over to Ken Schrader. It is 6 o'clock is Hut Strickland. And his 9 o'clock is Bill Elliott. Elliott's been involved in quite a bit here early on. All right, so we're looking at the blue pit crew rating. First is Harry Gant. He's a 9. Brett Bodine is a 7. So this challenge is coming at a +2. Gant needs a 5 to 12. He rolls a 12, and we have a new race leader in Harry Gant. There's a pass. And Gant's the race leader. Next is Darrell Waltrip. He's an 8. Harry Gant's a 9. He's challenging at a -1. Waltrip needs an 8 to 12. He rolls a 9, and now he's the new leader. Remember, this is pit stops during green flag racing. So it's another pass. And it's Darrell Waltrip in the lead now. And next is Ken Schrader. Schrader's an 8. Waltrip's an 8. Challenge is at a 0. Schrader needs a 7 to 12. He rolls a 9. And we've had 3 lead changes during these pit stops because Schrader is successful and takes the lead. Next is Hut Strickland. He and Schrader are both 8s. Challenge is at a 0. Strickland needs a 7 to 12. He rolls an 11, and he takes the lead. Hut Strickland. And lastly will be Bill Elliott. Elliott's an 8. Strickland's an 8. Challenge is at 0. Elliott needs a 7 to 12. He rolls a 6 and fails. So after those pit stops, under green flag, Hut Strickland is the race leader. All right, the second part of phase 3 is the penalty check. We're going to see if there were any infractions during these pit stops. And we're going to select a random driver and 4 adjacent. And we'll be once again looking at the pit crew rating. So it's 35. That'd be Jeff Bodine. So it's Jeff Bodine. His 12 o'clock comes down to Mickey Gibbs. His 3 o'clock is Joe Rootman. His 6 o'clock, Sterling Marlin. And his 9 o'clock is Larry Pearson. Okay, so we're looking at the blue pit crew rating again, but we're not using the quality pass matrix. What we need is to be lower or equal to the pit crew rating. There's no infraction. If the die roll is higher, there was some infraction. Driver's forced to come in for stop and go, and he'll go a lap down. All right, so Jeff Bodine is an 8. He needs an 8 or less. He rolls a 7. He's good. So he passes. Next is Mickey Gibbs. Gibbs is a 7. He needs a 7 or less. He rolls a 10 and is forced to come in for a stop and go. And he now goes a lap down. That's a fail. And a green lap marker. Next is Joe Rootman. He's an 8. So he needs an 8 or less. Rolls a 3. He's successful. Passes. Sterling Marlin. He's also an 8. Needs an 8 or less. Rolls a 7. And passes. And lastly would be Larry Pearson. He's a 4. He needs a 4 or less. And unfortunately for him, he's forced to come in for a stop and go due to some pit row infraction, and he goes a lap down. That's a fail and a green lap marker. And after all that, Hud Strickland, because he wasn't involved, remains the race leader. All right, and he's going to face 2 challenges in a row. Well, he's going to face a challenge. We'll see if he faces the second one. But between phases 3 and 4, we have 2 consecutive challenges. And the first challenge for Strickland is coming from 25, Larry Pearson. It cannot be him because he is... Actually, it can be because he's only 1 lap down. He's going to be trying to get back on the lead lap. So, let's see. Well, he's going to be unsuccessful because he's a minus... Or excuse me, he's a 2. That makes him a -9. He automatically fails, so he goes 2 laps down. He wasn't trying to take the lead. He was trying to stay on the lead, or trying to stay 1 lap down in this case. So that's an automatic failure. Hud Strickland remains the race leader, and he's going to face the second challenge from 46, Bill Elliott, who's, as I mentioned already, has been involved in a lot so far in this race. So Elliott is an 11. Strickland's an 11. Challenge is at 0. He needs a 7 to 12 to take the lead. And he rolls that 7, and we have a new race leader in Bill Elliott. There's a pass. And Elliott has the lead. Okay, so now we're going to do a contact check. And remember, we get a +1 here at Michigan. I'm going to select a random driver, 4 adjacents, and we're going to be looking at the yellow contact avoidance rating. And that driver is 33. It's going to be Stanley Smith. Stanley Smith. And his 12 o'clock is Sterling Marlin. His 3 o'clock is Richard Petty. 6 o'clock, Morgan Shepherd. And his 9 o'clock, Kyle Petty. Okay, so we're looking at the yellow contact avoidance number. Gets a +1 here, so that makes Stanley Smith a 5. He needs to get a 4 or less. He rolls an 11 and is forced to retire. So Stanley Smith fails and DNFs. Next is Sterling Marlin. He's a 10. +1 here at Michigan makes him an 11. He needs a 10 or less. And he rolls a 4. He passes. Next is Richard Petty. He's a 5. Makes him a 6. He needs a 5 or less. He gets into a scrape and is forced to retire. So that's a fail and a DNF. All right, next, Morgan Shepherd. He's a 10. He becomes an 11. He needs a 10 or less. And he rolls that 10 and just avoids contact. So he passes. And last is Kyle Petty. He's a 6. He becomes a 7. He needs a 6 or less. And he rolls that 6 and he's safe. So he passes, and after all that, Bill Elliott remains the race leader. Now, because of that contact, we're going to have pit stops under caution. This is going to involve we're in the portion of the race now where everything is going to involve the race leader. Okay, so it's going to be Bill Elliott, his 4 adjacent drivers, +1 random. So. And we will be looking at the blue pit crew rating using the quality pass matrix. Okay, so first we select his adjacent drivers. So his 12 o'clock is Lake Speed. His 3 o'clock is Harry Gant. 6 o'clock, Joe Rootman. And his 9 o'clock is Ernie Irvin. And the random driver will be 42 Lake Speed, who is already involved in this. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at Lake Speed's adjacent drivers and take the highest rated one. So his 12 o'clock is Jimmy Spencer, who's already, he's not involved in this, and he is an 8. Dale Jarrett's a 10. Bill Elliott's already involved. And it looks like it's going to be Morgan Shepherd with his 11. Okay. So first is Lake Speed. Now we are looking at the pit crew rating. And we're going up against the leader. And we will use the quality pass matrix, okay? And we're looking at the blue pit crew rating. Lake Speed's a 6, Elliott's an 8, that's a -2. Speed needs a 9 to 12. He rolls a 5 and fails. Bill Elliott remains the race leader. Next is Harry Gant. Harry Gant's a 9, Elliott's an 8. Gant challenges at a +1. He needs a 6 to 12. He rolls a 9. We have a new race leader in Harry Gant. Pass, and he's the leader. Next is Joe Rootman. He's an 8. Gant's a 9. Challenges at a -1. Rootman needs an 8 to 12. He rolls a 5 and fails. Gant remains the race leader. Next is Ernie Irvin. Ernie Irvin's an 8. Gant's a 9. The challenge is at a -1. Irvin needs an 8 to 12. He rolls a 5 and fails. Gant remains the race leader. And lastly will be Morgan Shepherd. He's an 8. Gant's a 9. Challenge at a -1. Shepherd needs an 8 to 12. And he rolls a 7 and fails. And after the pit stops under caution, Harry Gant is the race leader. And he will now face a challenge. And that challenge is coming from 33, who is out of the race, so we'll roll again. And 54, Bobby Hamilton, points leader Bobby Hamilton. Okay, so Gant's an 11, Hamilton's a 10. Challenge is at a -1. Hamilton needs an 8 to 12. He rolls a 5 and fails. And Harry Gant remains the race leader. Okay, so now we're into the closing laps action phase. And first we're going to see if there's a mechanical check here at the end. And here at Michigan, that'll happen on a roll of an 8 to 12. And it's 10, so that's a yes. So that's going to be a mechanical check for Harry Gant. He's an 11. Here at Michigan, it's a -1. That makes him a 10. He needs a 9 or less to avoid a mechanical issue. If he rolls a 9, he's going to go several laps down. If he rolls a 10 or greater, he'll be out of the race. He rolls an 11, gets banged up, and is out of the race. We're going to keep that marker there. So mechanical check was yes. It was Gant. He failed, and he's a DNF. Tough break for Harry Gant. So now we have to determine the new leader by using the rules of priority. So we look at this spot's 12 o'clock. That's Darrell Waltrip. He's an 11. Well, I can tell you right now it's going to be Darrell Waltrip who becomes the leader, because 11 is the highest you can be, and he has the priority rule being at the 12 o'clock position, because as you can see, Ken Schrader's an 11 at 3, Hut Strickland's an 11, so is Bill Elliott. The tiebreaker goes to Darrell Waltrip, and so he is the new race leader after that mechanical check. So it's Darrell Waltrip, and he's going to face a challenge, and that challenge will come from 65, Hut Strickland. All right, so Strickland is an 11. Darrell Waltrip's an 11. Challenge is at 0. Strickland needs a 7 to 12. And he rolls that 7. Takes the lead. Pass. And that Strickland is the race leader. Okay, now we're going to see if there's a contact check. And contact will happen on a 7 to 12 here at Michigan. 9, so that's a yes. And that's going to be the race leader, Hut Strickland, his adjacent cars, and one random. So be Hut Strickland. And his 12 o'clock is Darrell Waltrip. His 3 o'clock is Davey Allison. First time we've mentioned that name in this race. His 6 o'clock is Bobby Hillen Jr. Same could be said for Hillen Jr. And his 9 o'clock is Rick Mast. And the random driver will be 52, Dale Jarrett. Okay, so we're looking at the yellow contact avoidance rating, and here it gets a +1. So Hut Strickland's a 7. He becomes an 8. He needs a 7 or less. He rolls a 6 and passes. And remains the race leader. Next is Darrell Waltrip. He's an 8. Becomes a 9. He needs an 8 or less. He rolls a 9 and gets involved in some contact. Has to go behind the wall for a few laps, and he is several laps down. He gets a fail and a yellow lap marker. Next is Davey Allison. He's a 10. He becomes an 11. He needs a 10 or less. He rolls a 9 and just makes it. Pass. Next is Bobby Hillen Jr. He's an 11. He becomes a 12. He needs anything but boxcars. He rolls a 6 and he's good, so he passes. Rick Mast is a 9, becomes a 10. He needs a 9 or less. He rolls a 4, and he also passes. And last is Dale Jarrett. Jarrett's a 5, makes him a 6. He needs a 5 or less. He rolls a 9 and gets in some serious contact and has to leave the race. Dale Jarrett, who was the race winner in real life here at the Champion Spark Plugs 400 in 1991, fails and is forced to retire with a DNF. And after all that, Hut Strickland remains the race leader. Now, because we had contact, we're going to do pit stops under caution, and this will be the race leader. The four adjacent drivers to the race leader, and one random. So 12 o'clock for Hut Strickland. Can't be Darrell Waltrip because he's several laps down, so it goes up to Chad Little. So it would be Little. His 3 o'clock is Davey Allison. 6 o'clock is Bobby Hillen Jr. His 9 o'clock is Rick Mast. And the random challenge will come from 21, Mark Martin. Okay, so we're looking at the pit crew ratings here. That's the blue number. So the first one's coming from Chad Little. He's a 7. Strickland's an 8. Challenge is at a -1. He needs an 8 to 12. He rolls a 7 and fails. Hut Strickland remains the leader. Next is Davey Allison. He's an 8. Strickland's an 8. Challenge is at a 0. Allison needs a 7 to 12. He rolls an 8. We have a new race leader in Davey Allison. So passes. Now Hillen Jr. is a 7. Allison's an 8. Challenge is at a -1. Bobby Hillen Jr. needs an 8 to 12. He rolls a 6 and fails. Next is Rick Mast. He's an 8. Davey Allison's an 8. Challenge is at a 0. Mast needs a 7 to 12. He rolls an 8. We have a new race leader in Rick Mast. Pass. And the final challenge will be coming from Mark Martin. He and Rick Mast are both 8s, so it's a challenge at 0. Martin needs a 7 to 12. He rolls a 9, and we have a new race leader after the pit stops in Mark Martin. And he shall face a challenge. And that challenge is coming from 55, Rick Mast. So Martin and Mast going back and forth here late in the race. Mast is a 9, Martin's an 11. The challenge is at a -2. Mast needs a 9 to 12 to take the lead again. He rolls a 6 and fails. Mark Martin remains the race leader. Okay, next would be a pit crew check, but the event is void because we had pit stops under caution, so that's a void. Now we go down to see if there's going to be some late race green flag racing. And that'll happen on an 8 to 12 here at Michigan. We roll a 6, so that's a no. So what that means is we're coming down to the final challenge. And the way that works is we take the race leader, the 4 adjacent, And whichever one of those drivers has the highest race rating using the rules of priority, they will present that final challenge to the leader. So we got Dale Earnhardt at 12 o'clock with an 11, Ted Musgrave with an 8, because we jump over Gibbs, and Musgrave's at 3 o'clock, that's an 8. 12 o'clock is Ernie Irvan, and 6 o'clock is Ernie Irvan, and 9 o'clock is Ricky Rudd. Well, the challenge is going to be coming from Dale Earnhardt because he has the 11, and he gets the tiebreaker on the rules of priority by being at the 12 o'clock position. So this is the final challenge. Out of nowhere comes Dale Earnhardt. Haven't called him all race other than to place his card in the field. And he's challenging Mark Martin. They're both 11s. So this is a challenge at a 0. On a 7 to 12, Dale Earnhardt wins. And anything else, it's Mark Martin's race. And it's a 9, and for the first time this season, Dale Earnhardt wins a race. All right, so got our winner in Dale Earnhardt, and now we do what I always refer to as the fun part. Okay, so I'm going to take Dale Earnhardt off the grid because he won, but we're going to keep this marker here. Now, the driver who lost that final challenge, Mark Martin, he of course finishes second. All right, so now we're going to keep that marker for Earnhardt, but we're going to place another marker here for Mark Martin because we need to look at the rules of priority to determine the rest of the top 5. Okay, so the 12 o'clock was the winner. Ted Musgrave was eligible for this challenge at an 8. So was Ricky Rudd. He was at 9 o'clock. So was Ernie Irvan, who was at 6. So it's going to be Irvan finishing 3rd, then Rudd, then Musgrave. Okay, so we can get rid of this. All right, so now we're going to stay in the groove, the middle groove, which is where Dale Earnhardt was. And we're going to go clockwise from there and remove drivers based on race rating. So next would be Kyle Petty. This is going to be his best finish in a while. Then Alan Kowicki, because they're both 11s. Then Jeff Bodine, he's also an 11. And Morgan Shepherd. Okay. Now we go to 10s. And that'll be Bobby Hamilton. 9s, Joe Rootman, Rick Mast, Brett Bodine. 8s. No 8s. Only 2 drivers left are the twice lapped Larry Pearson and Lake Speed. Okay, so now we move in to the top groove and go clockwise. So it'll be Sterling Marlin and Jimmy Spencer. Now we move out to the outer and we remove drivers based on race rating. Next will be Rusty Wallace, Davey Allison, that's good news for Bobby Hamilton, Ken Schrader, Bill Elliott, Hut Strickland, Darrell Waltrip's lapped. Okay, so now we look for 10s, Bobby Hillin Jr., Terry Labonte. 9s, 8s, Chad Little. No 7s. Next would be 6 with Dave Marcus and 2 with Jimmy Means. Okay, so now we go back to Dale Earnhardt's groove. And, well, actually, the only drivers we have left are going to be Mickey Gibbs, who's 1 lap down, Larry Pearson, who's 2 laps down, and Darrell Waltrip, who's many laps down. He goes on the bottom of the pile, and then on the bottom of that will be all the drivers who did not finish. And that's it for this race. So top 10 at the Champion Spark Plugs 400 in Brooklyn, Michigan at Michigan International Speedway in a replay on August 18th, 1991. Winner, Dale Earnhardt. Second, Mark Martin. Third, Ernie Irvan. Fourth, Ricky Rudd. Fifth, Ted Musgrave. Sixth, Kyle Petty. 7, Alan Kulwicki. 8, Jeff Bodine. 9, Morgan Shepherd. And 10th, Bobby Hamilton. Another top 10 finish for Bobby Hamilton. So we'll do a total on the points and see how everything shakes down before the next race, which will be at Bristol. That will be race number 20. So this season is starting to wind down. 10 more races to go, I guess. Yep, because the next race is race 20, and there are 29. So there are 10 races left, and I'm anxious to get the points totaled up and see where everybody stands. You know, has Dale Earnhardt with this win closed the gap? Ernie Irvan was just outside the top 10. Ricky Rudd's in the top 10. So is Kulwicki, and Jeff Bodine might be somewhere there as well, and Morgan Shepherd. Well, I can take a real quick look here. I think, if I can open up. Yep, Kulwicki's in the top 10. Jeff Bodine is not, but he's 13th. So yeah, we'll see how things shake out. All right, that's going to do for this episode. If you hung around with me, I really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed it. If you just popped in and were wondering what was going on, this is just one of the projects that we do here. And I'll be back again. And thank you for stopping by the way. And I'll be back again in the near future with another video. And until then, take care.